The moment my son smiled at the bank teller and said, "I'd like to withdraw everything from my mother's accounts today," an uneasy chill crept down my spine. I was standing right beside him, yet no one had asked me a single question. Emily Brooks reached for the paperwork, but before she could process it, branch manager David Carter glanced at one signature and suddenly held up his hand. "Stop the transaction!" The entire lobby fell silent. Michael's confident smile faded. And in that terrifying moment, I realized the signature that was about to save my life wasn't the one my son believed he had forged perfectly. If you've ever had to choose between trusting someone you love and trusting your own instincts, I'd love to hear your story. Would you have questioned your own child in my place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with suspense, unexpected twists, and hard-earned justice, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support truly means more than you know. My name is Isabella Jones, and until 2 years ago, I believed I had lived a life most people would call ordinary. I never chased wealth or recognition. I spent 38 years teaching second graders at a small elementary school outside Columbus, Ohio. Every September brought a fresh group of nervous little faces into my classroom, and every June I watched them leave just a little braver, a little kinder, and a little more confident than when they had arrived. There was never much money in teaching, but there was purpose. That was enough for me. When I retired at 65, my husband William joked that I would finally have enough time to organize every drawer in the house. He wasn't wrong. William had been an engineer his entire career. Unlike me, he believed everything in life should have a plan. Every receipt had a folder. Every insurance policy had a backup copy. Every investment statement was neatly filed inside a fireproof cabinet in his home office. I used to tease him. "One day you'll organize the entire universe." He would laugh, adjust his reading glasses, and answer, "Maybe not the universe, but I can certainly keep this family from falling apart." Back then, I thought he meant fixing broken appliances or balancing our retirement accounts. I didn't realize he was talking about something much deeper. William passed away unexpectedly after suffering a heart attack one quiet autumn morning. One moment we were drinking coffee together on our back porch. The next, I was sitting beside a hospital bed holding a hand that would never squeeze mine again. Nothing prepares you for that kind of silence. People often think grief is loud, that it's crying, screaming, or collapsing to the floor. For me, grief was quiet. It was setting the table for two before remembering there was only one of us left. It was hearing the garage door in the evening and instinctively expecting William to walk inside carrying groceries. It was waking up at 3 in the morning because the other side of the bed felt impossibly cold. The house that had once been filled with laughter suddenly echoed with memories. Our son Michael stepped into that emptiness almost immediately. He was 42 years old, successful on the surface, and always impeccably dressed. He worked as the owner of a small construction consulting company in Columbus. Business seemed good from everything he shared with me. He drove a luxury SUV, wore expensive watches, and talked about new clients almost every week. Looking back now, I wonder how much of that success was real. But at the time, I never questioned it. He started visiting every Saturday. Sometimes he brought fresh groceries. Other times he arrived carrying takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant. "Mom," he'd say, with that familiar smile, "you don't need to cook today." We would eat together in the kitchen where William and I had shared thousands of meals. For a little while, the house felt alive again. Lauren, my daughter-in-law, joined us occasionally. She was always polite, always perfectly dressed, always carrying a carefully wrapped dessert or bouquet of flowers. She hugged me warmly every visit. "You shouldn't be alone so much, Isabella," she often said. "You've got us." Those words meant everything to me. When you're grieving, kindness becomes unforgettable. Little by little, Michael began helping with practical things around the house. He replaced light bulbs, he mowed the lawn, he installed a new security camera after hearing about break-ins nearby. One afternoon, while helping me organize the kitchen, he noticed a stack of unopened utility bills. "You forgot to pay these?" I looked at the envelopes and sighed. I suppose I did. William had always handled most of our monthly finances. I knew where our money was. I knew roughly what we owned. But he had managed the details. Learning everything alone felt overwhelming. Michael smiled reassuringly. "I can take care of this." "I don't want to be a burden." "You aren't. It'll only take a few minutes each month." I hesitated. "I don't know." He gently rested his hand on mine. "Mom." His voice sounded exactly like the little boy who used to ask me for bedtime stories. "You spent your whole life taking care of me. Let me take care of you now." Those words melted every doubt I had. From that day forward, Michael started paying my utility bills online. Soon afterward, he helped me set up automatic payments. Then he suggested paperless statements. Everything's digital now. It'll keep your mailbox from filling up. It'll be easier. It made perfect sense. I agreed. Weeks turned into months. Whenever I had questions about the bank, Michael already seemed to know the answers. Whenever a letter arrived that looked complicated, he'd open it before I even reached for my reading glasses. I already called them. They fixed it. Nothing to worry about. I was grateful, or at least I believed I was. One rainy afternoon, I found myself searching for one of William's old investment folders. I couldn't locate it anywhere. I checked his office. The filing cabinet, the closet, nothing. When Michael stopped by later that evening, I mentioned it casually. "I can't seem to find one of your father's folders." "Oh, the blue one. I thought it was in the cabinet." Michael frowned thoughtfully. "I probably moved it when I was helping organize things." "I'll find it." His answer sounded completely reasonable. I never asked about it again. That became a pattern. Whenever something went missing, a document, a statement, a receipt, Michael always had an explanation. And because he always sounded calm, I accepted every one of them. Sometimes I wonder how easily trust can become a habit. Not because someone demands it, but because they've earned it over years. Every Sunday afternoon, Michael called. "How are you doing today? Need anything from the store? Did you remember to take your medication?" He never missed a birthday, never forgot Mother's Day. He even surprised me with flowers on the anniversary of William's death. "You know Dad would want you smiling," he whispered as he hugged me. I cried into his shoulder. I remember thinking how fortunate I was. So many elderly people I knew rarely heard from their children. Mine checked on me constantly. At church, friends often smiled when I talked about him. "You raised a wonderful son." I really did. At least, that was what I believed. There were tiny moments that didn't quite fit. Moments so small they disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. Occasionally, when I asked about my retirement savings, Michael answered a little too quickly. "Everything's growing. You're perfectly fine." When I offered to accompany him to the bank one day, he laughed. "No need. I've already handled it." I remember thinking that William would probably have insisted on seeing every statement himself. But William wasn't here anymore, and I was tired. Grief has a way of making decisions feel heavier than they really are. Sometimes it seems easier to let someone else carry them. One evening I stood alone in William's old office. His favorite leather chair still faced the window. His reading lamp still sat exactly where he'd left it. Dust had settled over the desk. I gently ran my fingers across its surface before opening the top drawer. Inside lay one of his old fountain pens. I smiled despite myself. William had refused to use ordinary ballpoint pens. He always claimed a signature deserved respect. Holding that pen brought back his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me. "Never sign anything you haven't read, Bella." I laughed softly through my tears. "You always worried too much, or perhaps not enough." I carefully returned the pen to the drawer and closed it. Outside, I heard Michael's SUV pulling into the driveway for another Saturday visit. I had no idea that the son I was about to welcome inside had already begun making decisions that would quietly change everything I believed about trust family and the true cost of unconditional love. The first time Michael asked me to sign a stack of financial documents, I didn't think twice about it. He arrived on a chilly Tuesday afternoon carrying a slim leather portfolio under one arm and 2 cups of coffee from my favorite cafe. "I figured you could use a little treat," he said as he kissed my cheek. "You always know how to spoil me." "You've earned it." We sat together at the kitchen table, the same oak table William and I had purchased nearly 40 years earlier. Its surface bore tiny scratches from family dinners, science projects, holiday baking, and countless conversations that had shaped our lives. Michael laid several papers neatly in front of me. "Nothing exciting," he said with a smile. "Just routine updates for the bank." I adjusted my reading glasses. There seemed to be a lot of pages. "They've changed some federal regulations." "I already read everything." "You just need to sign where I highlighted." His tone was calm and reassuring. I trusted him completely. Without reading more than a few headings, I signed each page. Michael gathered the papers quickly. "Perfect. That saves us both a trip downtown." I smiled. "I'm lucky to have you." He looked at me with what I believed was genuine affection. "I'm the lucky one, Mom." As soon as he left, I returned to watering the flowers on my back porch. The paperwork disappeared from my mind almost immediately. That became our routine over the following months. Every few weeks, Michael arrived with another folder. Sometimes there were 3 signatures, sometimes 6, occasionally 10. The explanations never changed. Insurance update, retirement paperwork, bank compliance, tax records, routine verification. Each sounded perfectly ordinary, and because they came from my son, I never questioned them. William probably would have. He had always read every line of every document, even when buying something as simple as a lawnmower. I used to tease him mercilessly. "You'd read the instructions on a loaf of bread?" He would grin. "That's because people stop paying attention when they think something is routine." At the time, I found his caution almost amusing. Now those memories surfaced more often than I liked. One afternoon, while balancing my checkbook, I noticed something strange. "I haven't received a bank statement in months." The realization caught me off guard. For decades, statements had arrived during the first week of every month. I kept them carefully organized inside labeled folders. I searched the kitchen drawer. Nothing. The mail basket? Nothing. William's filing cabinet? Still nothing. When Michael stopped by that evening, I mentioned it casually. "I think the bank forgot to send my statements." He didn't hesitate. "They switched you to electronic delivery. They told you." "I handled it while updating your online account." "Oh," I frowned. "I don't remember agreeing to that." "You did. You said paper was just clutter." "Did I?" The older I became, the more I questioned my own memory. Perhaps I really had forgotten. Michael saw the uncertainty on my face and immediately softened his voice. "It's completely normal, Mom. You've had a lot on your mind since Dad passed." His words eased my concern. Grief had indeed made certain memories blurry. I convinced myself he was right. A few weeks later, I visited the grocery store. As I reached the checkout counter, my debit card declined. The young cashier smiled politely. "I'm sorry. It says insufficient authorization." Heat rushed into my cheeks. "That can't be right. I used it yesterday." I tried again. The same message appeared. Embarrassed, I paid with cash I kept in my wallet. The entire drive home, I worried something had happened to my account. When I called Michael, he answered immediately. "Oh, I forgot to tell you. The bank replaced your card because of possible fraud. They mailed the new one to me since I handle your financial paperwork." "You have it, of course." "I was planning to bring it tomorrow." I let out a relieved sigh. "Thank goodness." "You scared me," he laughed. "I've got everything under control." The following day, he handed me a brand new debit card, still sealed. Everything appeared perfectly legitimate. Again, my doubts disappeared. Months continued slipping quietly past. Life settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable. Church on Sundays, gardening on Mondays, book club every other Thursday, lunch with Nancy Miller whenever our schedules allowed. Nancy had lived across the street from William and me for over 25 years. She had watched Michael grow from a shy little boy into a successful businessman. She cared about us almost like family. One afternoon, while we were trimming roses together, she casually asked, "Have you been traveling lately?" "No." "Why, I thought I saw Michael leaving with suitcases from your house." I smiled. "Oh, he was probably taking donations." "I've been cleaning closets." Nancy nodded slowly. "If you say so." Something about her expression lingered with me long after she walked home. Later that evening, I wandered upstairs to the guest bedroom. The closet looked almost empty. I couldn't remember exactly what had once been inside. Old blankets, winter coats, boxes. Everything seemed different, not dramatically. Just enough to make me wonder. When Michael visited that weekend, I mentioned it. "I think some things disappeared from upstairs." "Oh." "I donated a few old boxes." "You asked me to." "I did." "You said you wanted less clutter." Again, perhaps I had. My confidence in my own memory seemed weaker than ever. That frightened me more than I cared to admit. Several days later, I decided to organize William's office again. As I opened one cabinet, I noticed several important folders missing. Investment records, property tax files, insurance binders. Only empty spaces remained. I searched every shelf twice, then 3 times. Nothing. Michael arrived just before dinner. "I can't find your father's financial files." "They're gone." Without showing even the slightest surprise, he answered, "I moved everything into digital storage. It's safer. You don't need paper copies anymore." "Can I see them?" "Absolutely. I'll print anything you want." His confidence made me feel almost foolish for asking. Still, A tiny voice somewhere deep inside whispered that something wasn't right. For the first time in my life, I ignored that voice. A week later, Michael invited me to lunch. Halfway through the meal, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and stood up immediately. "I have to take this. It's business." He walked several yards away. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the restaurant was quiet. His voice carried. "I'll have the money soon. I just need a little more time. No, don't contact my mother." He lowered his voice after that. When he returned, he smiled as though nothing had happened. "Everything okay? Just a difficult client." He changed the subject so naturally that I let it go, but that conversation stayed with me all evening. Who had told someone not to contact me, and why? For the first time, I began noticing details I had overlooked for months. Michael seemed distracted. He checked his phone constantly. He jumped whenever it rang. Sometimes he stared into space as though calculating something invisible. At dinner one evening, Lauren quietly asked, "Everything all right?" Michael answered almost too quickly, "Business is stressful." She forced a smile. I caught her looking at him with concern. Whatever burden he carried, even his wife seemed unable to reach him. Late one night, unable to sleep, I wandered downstairs and poured myself a cup of tea. Moonlight spilled through the kitchen window. The house was silent. As I stood there, I noticed the small basket where I usually kept incoming mail. It was nearly empty, oddly empty. Years ago, William and I joked that retirement generated more paperwork than working ever had. Bank notices, insurance updates, investment summaries, property taxes, medical statements. Yet lately there was almost nothing. Had everything truly become electronic, or was something else happening? I couldn't answer that question. But for the first time, I realized something even more unsettling. I no longer knew exactly where my financial information was, and somehow I had allowed that to happen one signature at a time. The thought refused to leave me. I no longer knew exactly where my financial records were. For nearly 40 years, William had insisted that every important document had a home. Tax returns filled one cabinet. Insurance policies occupied another. Investment statements were arranged by year, each binder labeled in his careful handwriting. He used to tell me, if either one of us ever needs something, we should be able to find it in less than 5 minutes. Now I couldn't find half of what he had organized so meticulously. I tried convincing myself that I was simply adjusting to a more digital world. After all, nearly everyone paid bills online these days. Banks encouraged paperless statements. Companies preferred email over traditional mail. Perhaps I was simply becoming one of those older people who struggled to keep up with technology. That explanation comforted me, at least for a little while. Then Nancy knocked on my front door one Thursday afternoon. She carried 2 slices of homemade apple pie balanced carefully on a tray. "I bake too much," she announced with a grin. "You've been saying that for 20 years. "And you've believed me for 20 years." We laughed together as we settled onto the back porch overlooking my small flower garden. The September breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the neighborhood. For a while we talked about ordinary things, the church fundraiser, her grandchildren, the unusually warm weather. Then almost absent-mindedly, Nancy asked, "How's Michael doing?" "As busy as ever. He takes wonderful care of you." "He really does." She nodded slowly, but didn't immediately respond. I noticed her stirring her coffee without taking a sip. "What's on your mind?" I asked. She looked almost uncomfortable. "I've been debating whether I should mention something." "You can tell me anything. I don't want you thinking I'm trying to cause trouble." "Nancy, I've known you almost 30 years." She sighed. "I've seen Michael downtown several times over the last few months." "That's not unusual." "No, but he wasn't alone." I looked at her curiously. "He met with someone, an older gentleman." "They always walked into the bank together." I frowned. "The bank?" "More than once. Actually, quite a few times." A strange sensation settled in my stomach. "I thought maybe he was helping with your accounts." I wasn't there. Nancy looked surprised. "You weren't—" "No." She hesitated. "I suppose there could be a perfectly reasonable explanation." "I'm sure there is." I smiled politely, but inside questions began multiplying faster than I could answer them. Why had Michael visited the bank repeatedly without mentioning it? What business required so many meetings? And who was the older man Nancy kept seeing with him? Before leaving, Nancy squeezed my hand gently. "I probably shouldn't have said anything." "No, I'm glad you did." Although I wasn't entirely sure that was true. After she left, I wandered through the quiet house trying to shake off my uneasiness. Instead of fading, it grew stronger. That evening I found myself standing outside William's old office again. I hadn't spent much time there since his death. Everything remained almost exactly as he had left it. His favorite leather chair, the framed photograph from our 25th wedding anniversary, the antique globe he'd inherited from his father. Even his reading glasses still rested beside an unopened engineering magazine. Dust had settled over everything. I slowly opened the fireproof cabinet. Several folders remained. Others were clearly missing. I pulled out the ones that were left. Home insurance, medical records, our wills. Then something slipped from between two folders and landed softly on the floor. It was a sealed envelope. Across the front, in William's unmistakable handwriting, were 5 simple words. For Isabella, if ever needed. My heartbeat quickened. Carefully I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. I recognized the blue ink from his favorite fountain pen. My dearest Bella, if you're reading this, it probably means I'm no longer there to remind you of something I repeated far too often. A smile tugged at my lips, despite the tears already forming. That sounded exactly like William. The letter continued. You always laughed whenever I insisted on reading every document before signing it. I hope one day you'll understand why. People often assume trust and caution cannot exist together. They're wrong. The people we love deserve our trust. But every important decision deserves our attention. I swallowed hard. His words felt strangely personal, almost immediate, as though he somehow knew exactly when I would need them. Near the bottom of the page, one sentence had been underlined. Never surrender control of your signature, not even to someone you love. I stared at those words for a long time. A chill ran through me. Only a week earlier I had signed another stack of documents Michael had brought home, without reading them, without asking questions, without hesitation. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside its envelope. Then I noticed another piece of paper tucked beneath it. Unlike the handwritten letter, this one was typed. It listed the names of several professionals William trusted. Our accountant, our financial advisor, and at the very top, Robert Hayes, his attorney. At the bottom, William had written another short note. If anything ever feels wrong, call Robert before making any financial decision. I closed my eyes. Robert, I hadn't spoken to him in almost a year. He had attended William's funeral and checked on me several times afterward, but eventually life had pulled us in different directions. Michael usually handled anything involving paperwork now. For a moment I reached toward the telephone, then I stopped. What would I even say, hello, Robert? I think I'm becoming suspicious of my own son? The thought sounded ridiculous. Michael had never yelled at me, never threatened me, never asked me for money. He visited every week. He brought groceries. He fixed things around the house. He hugged me every time he left. Could someone like that really be hiding something? The answer felt impossible, yet William's letter wouldn't leave my mind. The following Sunday after church, I found myself standing beside William's grave. The cemetery was peaceful. Rows of American flags fluttered gently near the Veterans Memorial. I brushed a few fallen leaves away from his headstone. I wish you were here, I whispered. You always knew what to do. A breeze stirred the trees overhead. For a brief moment I imagined hearing his voice. Not literally, just the memory of it. Pay attention, Bella. You notice more than you think. As I walked back toward my car, my phone rang. It was Michael. Hey, Mom. What are you doing this Tuesday? I don't think I have plans. Good. I need you to come to the bank with me. The bank. It won't take long. Just a few routine updates. There was that word again. Routine. He continued before I could answer. We really shouldn't put this off. His voice sounded unusually firm, almost urgent. I glanced back one last time at William's grave. The envelope containing his letter rested inside my purse. For reasons I couldn't explain, I tightened my grip on it before answering. All right, I'll go with you. The moment I ended the call, a quiet feeling settled deep inside me. For months, I had ignored every tiny doubt, every missing document, every unanswered question, every uneasy feeling. But as Tuesday approached, I could no longer convince myself that everything was normal. Somewhere ahead of me, hidden beneath all those routine explanations, was a truth I wasn't ready to face. And for the first time since William died, I was afraid that discovering it might cost me far more than money. I barely slept the night before our trip to the bank. Every time I closed my eyes, William's letter replayed itself in my mind. Never surrender control of your signature, not even to someone you love. It was such an unusual thing for him to write. William had always believed in preparing for possibilities rather than reacting to disasters. He carried jumper cables in every car, flashlights in every closet, and copies of important documents in 3 different locations. I had spent decades rolling my eyes at what I called his worst-case scenario planning. Now lying awake in the darkness, I wondered if he had simply seen dangers that I had refused to imagine. By 7 the next morning I was already dressed. I brewed coffee but barely touched it. The house felt strangely quiet. Outside, the October sky was overcast, covering the neighborhood in a dull gray light. At exactly 9 o'clock, Michael's black SUV pulled into my driveway. Right on time. He stepped out wearing a tailored navy suit instead of his usual business casual clothes. His shoes gleamed. His tie was perfectly straight. Even before he reached the front porch, he looked as though he were heading to an important meeting. "You look nice," I said after opening the door. He smiled, but it seemed rushed. "Big day." "For what?" He hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "Oh, just several errands after the bank." That answer felt oddly vague. Normally, Michael loved talking about work. Today, he avoided the subject. "You ready?" "I suppose." As I reached for my purse, my eyes drifted toward the small envelope containing William's letter. Almost without thinking, I slipped it inside. Something told me I wanted it with me. The drive to downtown Columbus usually took about 30 minutes. Normally, Michael filled every silence with conversation. He asked about church, my garden, my book club, the neighbors. Today was different. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. His eyes remained fixed on the road. Every few minutes he glanced at the dashboard clock. Twice he checked his phone while stopped at traffic lights. His foot tapped impatiently against the floorboard. "You seem nervous," I finally said. He forced a laugh. "Big client meeting later. I've got a lot on my mind. I hope everything's all right." "It will be." The conversation ended there. As we continued driving, I noticed he took an unfamiliar route. "Aren't we going the wrong way?" "No." "This avoids construction." "I didn't know there was construction. It started yesterday." Again, his answer came too quickly. I looked out the passenger window. The streets looked perfectly normal. No orange cones. No blocked intersections. No road crews. Perhaps the construction was farther ahead, or perhaps I pushed the thought away. About 10 minutes later, Michael's phone rang through the SUV's Bluetooth system. The caller ID flashed briefly across the dashboard screen. Lauren. He immediately pressed decline. A few seconds later, she called again. He silenced it without answering. "Aren't you going to pick up?" "I'll call her later." "She probably needs something." "It's nothing important." His voice carried an edge I wasn't used to hearing. Then his phone vibrated with a text message. Another, then another. He never looked at them. Instead, he turned the volume completely off. An uncomfortable silence settled between us. I watched familiar neighborhoods pass by outside the window. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Parents walking children to school. Delivery trucks unloading groceries. People carrying coffee into office buildings. Ordinary lives unfolding on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Yet inside the SUV, nothing felt ordinary. Halfway to downtown, Michael suddenly spoke. "Mom?" "Yes, there's something I want to ask." "What is it?" "When we're at the bank." He paused. "Just let me handle most of the talking." I frowned. "Why?" "They know me. I've already explained everything. It'll make the process much faster." "What process?" "The account updates." "I thought we were just signing paperwork." "We are. But there are several accounts involved." I turned toward him. "Several. You told me it was routine." "It is. So why does it sound so complicated?" For the first time that morning, genuine irritation crossed his face. "It only sounds complicated because banks make everything complicated." He took a slow breath before softening his voice again. "I just don't want you getting overwhelmed." His explanation sounded reasonable, yet something inside me resisted accepting it. "I can answer questions if someone asks me." "Of course. But honestly," he smiled, "they'll probably ask me instead." That sentence stayed with me. "They'll probably ask me instead." Why would anyone ask my son questions about my accounts instead of asking me? The closer we came to downtown, the more uneasy I became. When we stopped at another red light, Michael glanced toward me. "You brought your driver's license?" "Yes." "Good. And your debit card?" "Yes," he nodded. "What about your checkbook?" "I didn't bring it." His expression tightened. "I told you yesterday to bring it." "I don't remember that." "You must have forgotten." His tone wasn't angry, it was disappointed, like a teacher correcting a careless student. "I'm sorry. It's okay. We probably won't need it." Probably. Another strange word. The bank finally came into view. It was the same branch William and I had used for more than 30 years. The brick building looked exactly as I remembered. American flags fluttered near the entrance. Flower beds surrounded the front walkway. Customers came and went carrying envelopes and folders. Seeing the familiar building should have comforted me. Instead, my heart beat faster. Michael parked close to the entrance. Before getting out, he turned toward me. "One more thing. What if anyone asks complicated questions?" He smiled reassuringly. "Just let me answer. I know all the details." I stared at him. "I've managed your finances for nearly 2 years. You trust me, don't you?" There it was. The question I never imagined hearing. Of course I trusted him. He was my son. The little boy who used to crawl into our bed after thunderstorms. The teenager who worked part-time to buy me flowers for Mother's Day. The young man who cried harder than anyone else at William's funeral. How could I not trust him still? William's words echoed again. "Never surrender control of your signature." I looked at Michael, then at the bank entrance, then back at Michael. "I do trust you." His shoulders relaxed immediately. "I knew you did." He stepped out of the SUV and hurried around to open my door. His movements were almost too quick, too practiced. As we walked toward the entrance, I noticed him glance at his watch again. He seemed to be measuring every minute. Inside the bank smelled faintly of fresh coffee and polished wood. Several customers waited in line. Others sat with financial advisors inside glass offices. Nothing seemed unusual. Emily Brooks, a young teller with a friendly smile, looked up as we approached. "Good morning." Before I could answer, Michael stepped forward. "We're here for the account transfer we discussed." Emily smiled politely. "Of course. I'll gather the paperwork." She disappeared into the back office. While we waited, I quietly studied the lobby. Framed photographs of local community events decorated the walls. Near one office stood a familiar face, branch manager David Carter. William had always spoken highly of him. "He's one of the few bankers who still believes relationships matter," William once told me. David happened to glance across the lobby. Our eyes met for only a second. He smiled warmly. "Mrs. Jones, it's good to see you again." I smiled back. "It's been a while." "Far too long." He looked toward Michael. "I understand you've got quite a bit to take care of today." Michael answered before I could. "Yes." "We're hoping it won't take long." David nodded thoughtfully. "I'll stop by in a few minutes." He walked away toward his office. I noticed Michael watching him leave. For the first time all morning, I saw fear flash across my son's face. It vanished almost instantly, but I had seen it. And suddenly every uneasy feeling I had tried to ignore over the past several months returned all at once. I didn't yet know why Michael was afraid, but deep inside I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was about to happen inside that bank was far bigger than routine paperwork. Emily Brooks returned carrying a thick navy folder and a tablet tucked beneath her arm. She greeted me with the same warm smile I remembered from years ago. "Good morning, Mrs. Jones. It's nice to see you again." "It's nice to see you, too." She looked at Michael. "If you'll both come with me, we can use one of our private consultation desks." Michael nodded quickly. "Perfect." He lightly touched my elbow, guiding me before I had a chance to decide where I wanted to sit. It was a small gesture, almost invisible, yet I suddenly realized he had been guiding nearly every decision I made since we arrived. We settled at a round desk near the back of the lobby. The space felt private but wasn't completely enclosed. Customers continued moving through the bank behind us while employees worked quietly at nearby stations. Emily opened the folder. "I have several authorization forms here." She turned the first document toward Michael instead of me. He immediately picked up the pen. "I'll explain everything to my mother." Emily smiled politely. "Actually, Mrs. Jones will need to review each document herself before we continue." For the briefest moment, Michael's smile stiffened. "Of course." He slid the papers toward me. "Like I told you yesterday, these are just routine account updates." I looked down. The first page was filled with legal language. Small print covered nearly every inch. Near the bottom was a highlighted signature line. I reached for my reading glasses. Michael spoke before I could begin reading. "The first document simply updates your account preferences." Emily glanced at him, then back at me. "If you'd like, Mrs. Jones, I can explain each form individually." Before I answered, Michael leaned forward. "That won't be necessary. We've already gone over everything at home." Emily hesitated. "Very well." Something about the exchange unsettled me. William had always encouraged people to ask questions. Michael seemed eager to prevent them. I slowly turned to the second page. This one contained several bold headings. One phrase immediately caught my attention. Transfer authorization. I frowned. Michael? I thought we were updating paperwork. We are? This says transfer. He barely glanced at the page. That's just banking terminology. It doesn't mean anything unusual. Emily looked toward the document. Actually, Michael interrupted almost instantly, it's transferring funds between Mom's existing accounts. Nothing's leaving the bank. His explanation sounded reasonable enough. Still, I kept reading. Another heading appeared. Account closure request. My stomach tightened. Why does this mention closing accounts? Michael sighed softly the way someone might when answering a question for the 5th time. Mom, you've got 6 different accounts. Checking. Savings. Certificates. Everything's being consolidated. It'll make life easier. I don't remember discussing that. We talked about it 2 weeks ago. Did we? Yes, he smiled patiently. You probably forgot. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Perhaps I had forgotten. Lately, I seemed to question my own memory more often. Emily quietly watched our conversation without saying anything. I noticed she hadn't touched the keyboard in front of her, almost as though she was waiting. I continued turning pages. Every document required my signature. Some required initials. Others contained multiple authorization boxes. There were far more forms than I had anticipated. How many papers are there? Michael answered immediately. Only a few. Emily glanced down. There are 12 documents. 12, Michael chuckled. Half of them are duplicates. Government requirements. I wasn't convinced. As I adjusted my glasses again, my eyes drifted toward the signature already printed on one page. My own name, Isabella Jones. The signature looked odd. Not obviously wrong, just different. I leaned closer. The capital J curved slightly differently than I usually wrote it. Perhaps my handwriting had changed. People's signatures evolve over time, didn't they? I quietly signed my name beneath the highlighted line, then another and another. Each signature felt heavier than the last. While I worked, Michael watched almost every movement of my pen. Not the documents, my pen. It struck me as unusual. By the 6th form, I paused. My hands getting tired. We're almost done, Michael said quickly. Emily smiled sympathetically. Take all the time you need. There was kindness in her voice, real kindness, not impatience, not pressure. For some reason, that simple reassurance gave me courage. I picked up one of the completed forms. I'd like to read this one again. Michael immediately reached toward it. I already explained it. I know. I'd still like to read it. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he slowly released the page. I read the title carefully. Authorization for Full Balance Distribution. My heartbeat quickened. Michael. This says full balance. Yes. Meaning, it means the balance is being redistributed. Between the accounts. Emily quietly looked up from her desk. Mrs. Jones. Before she could continue, Michael spoke over her. Exactly what we discussed. He turned toward Emily with a pleasant smile. She's been under a lot of stress since losing Dad. Sometimes financial wording sounds scarier than it actually is. Emily nodded politely, but she didn't look convinced. I continued reading. Another paragraph mentioned transferring available funds into a newly designated primary account. I frowned. What primary account? Michael answered almost before I'd finished speaking. The new consolidated account. I don't remember opening one. We're opening it today. Together. That explanation seemed logical. Yet another question surfaced. If we're opening it today, why does this form already list an account number? Silence, just for a second. Then Michael laughed. They pre-assigned it. That's normal. I looked at Emily. She hesitated. It can happen under certain circumstances. Her answer sounded carefully chosen, not dishonest, but cautious. The room suddenly felt warmer. I loosened the scarf around my neck. Something wasn't fitting together. I simply couldn't identify what. Michael gathered several completed forms into a neat stack. See? We're almost finished. Emily began entering information into her computer. Keys clicked softly beneath her fingers. After several moments, she stopped typing. I'll just verify everything. Michael smiled confidently. Take your time. She compared one form to another, then another. Everything appeared routine. Customers continued chatting in the lobby. Phones rang softly in distant offices. Someone laughed near the front entrance. Ordinary sounds, ordinary people, an ordinary morning. Until Emily's expression changed. It was subtle. Her smile faded, her eyebrows pulled together slightly. She picked up one of the authorization forms and looked more closely at the signature. Then she opened another folder beside her. Inside were older account records. She placed the two signatures side by side. She didn't say anything. She simply studied them. Michael noticed. His posture stiffened. "Everything okay?" Emily looked up politely. "I just need to verify one detail." "What detail?" "A signature comparison." Michael's smile returned. "Oh, that's standard." "Of course." Emily nodded. "Usually." She continued comparing documents. 1 minute passed, then another. She quietly stood. "If you'll excuse me for just a moment." She gathered only 2 pages before walking toward David Carter's office. Michael watched her every step. The relaxed confidence I'd seen all morning disappeared completely. His jaw tightened. He began bouncing one knee beneath the table. Then he checked his watch. Again and again. I had never seen him nervous like this. Not once. "Michael?" Why are they checking my signature?" He forced another smile. "They probably do random audits." "Nothing to worry about." But his voice betrayed him. It had become thinner, faster, almost strained. Across the lobby, I watched Emily hand the documents to David Carter. He accepted them casually, then glanced at the signature. His expression changed immediately. He opened another folder, compared both pages, looked again, then slowly raised his eyes toward me, not toward Michael, toward me. The warmth disappeared from his face, replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. Concern, recognition, perhaps even alarm. Without saying a word, David picked up both documents and began walking toward our table. For reasons I couldn't explain, my heart suddenly began pounding so loudly that I could barely hear the sounds of the busy bank around me. David Carter approached our table with measured, unhurried steps. He carried only 2 documents in his hand, yet the look on his face made them seem heavier than bricks. Emily followed a few feet behind him, her usual cheerful expression replaced by quiet professionalism. Michael noticed them immediately. His fingers, which had been drumming nervously against the table, became perfectly still. David stopped beside us and offered me a courteous smile. "Mrs. Jones, it's good to see you again." "You too, David. I hope you're doing well." "I've had better days." He nodded with genuine sympathy. "I imagine you have." For a brief moment no one spoke. Then David looked down at the paperwork. "Before we continue today's transaction, I'd like to verify a few details." Michael answered before I could. "Of course." "Is something wrong?" David's eyes shifted toward him. "Just a standard verification." His voice remained calm, professional. "Impossible to read." Michael forced a smile. "We've already completed all the paperwork." "I understand. This won't take long." David turned back to me. "Mrs. Jones, would you mind answering a few questions?" "Not at all." Michael leaned forward slightly. "I've handled most of Mom's banking since Dad passed away." David acknowledged him with a polite nod. "I appreciate that. But today, I'd like to hear directly from Mrs. Jones." Something in the room changed. It wasn't loud. No one raised a voice. Yet I suddenly felt as though invisible lines had been drawn across the table. David on one side, Michael on the other. And somehow, I was standing between them. David picked up the first authorization form. "Can you tell me in your own words what today's transaction is intended to accomplish?" I blinked. I looked toward Michael instinctively. He immediately answered, "We're consolidating her accounts." David gently raised one hand. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jones." "I'd like your mother to answer." Michael fell silent. I looked back at David. I hesitated. "I thought we were updating paperwork." David nodded thoughtfully. "And did anyone explain that these forms authorize transferring nearly all available funds from your existing accounts?" The words struck me like icy water. "Nearly all—" I turned sharply toward Michael. "You never said that." He smiled nervously. "It's just moving the money into one account. That's all." I looked back at David. "Is that true?" David chose his words carefully. "The documents authorize a transfer of virtually every available balance into another account listed here." He tapped the paperwork. "This isn't simply changing mailing preferences or updating personal information." I felt my stomach tighten. "I didn't understand that." Michael spoke quickly. "Mom, we discussed everything." "No, I don't remember discussing this." "You've just forgotten." There it was again. Forgotten. The explanation he used every time something didn't make sense. For the first time, instead of comforting me, the word angered me. I haven't forgotten everything, Michael. Silence settled over the table. David remained calm. Mrs. Jones, did you personally request this transaction? I looked at the documents, then at Michael. Finally, I answered honestly. I don't believe I did. Michael let out a frustrated sigh. Mom, we've been planning this for weeks. You're just nervous. David quietly placed another piece of paper beside the first. It was an old signature card, yellowed with age. I recognized it immediately. William and I had signed it decades earlier when we first opened our savings account. David pointed toward my original signature, then toward the one on today's authorization. Would you mind comparing these? I adjusted my glasses. At first glance, they looked remarkably similar, almost identical. But the longer I stared, the more differences I noticed. The old Isabella had always written the capital J with a long downward curve before looping back. Today's version curved inward much sooner. The spacing between my first and last name looked tighter. The pressure of the pen appeared uneven. Tiny differences, almost impossible to notice. Yet now I couldn't stop seeing them. They don't look exactly alike. Michael immediately leaned closer. People's signatures change. They absolutely do, David agreed, but usually they change gradually. He opened another folder. Inside were signature cards spanning nearly 30 years. Every few years the bank had updated my records. He spread several across the table. I stared in disbelief. Despite changes in ink pen and age, one feature remained consistent. Every authentic signature contained the same distinctive curve in the letter J, every single one, except today's. Michael shifted in his chair. This is ridiculous. It's close enough. David looked at him steadily. For ordinary transactions, perhaps, but not for one involving this amount of money. I swallowed. How much money are we talking about? David glanced at me gently. I think it's best if we discuss that privately. Michael immediately objected. There are no secrets here. I'm her son. David remained composed. And Mrs. Jones is our client. The emphasis on the final word wasn't accidental. For the first time since arriving at the bank, I felt like someone was reminding everyone, including me, that these accounts belonged to me, not to Michael. Me, David continued. Mrs. Jones, can you tell me where these transferred funds were intended to go? I looked at the paperwork again. I assumed they were staying in my accounts. They are not. He slowly turned one page toward me. Near the bottom was the destination account number. Below it appeared the account holder's name. I leaned closer. My breath caught. The account wasn't under my name. It wasn't even a joint account. The printed name read Michael A. Jones. For several seconds I couldn't speak. I looked from the page to my son, then back again. No, I whispered. This has to be some kind of mistake. Michael's face turned pale. It isn't what it looks like. Then tell me what it is. His mouth opened, closed again. Finally he answered. I was going to manage everything for you. Temporarily. You'd still have access. I stared at him. My retirement savings, my emergency fund, the money your father and I spent 40 years building, you wanted it transferred into your personal account. It's only temporary. You were never supposed to worry about it. The words echoed through my mind. Never supposed to worry. As though protecting me required taking ownership of everything I had. David quietly spoke. Mrs. Jones? Because of the unusual nature of this transaction, I'd like to conduct one additional verification. What kind? I'd like to retrieve your original archived signature documents from our secure records. Michael stood abruptly. This is getting absurd. You already have signatures. David met his gaze calmly. Our policy allows additional verification whenever there are concerns regarding authorization. There are no concerns. I believe there are. The two men looked at each other across the table. Neither raised his voice. Neither moved. Yet the tension between them felt almost physical. Emily quietly stepped closer. Without a word, she positioned herself near the customer service desk, where another employee could easily hear if assistance became necessary. David turned toward her. Emily, please bring me Mrs. Jones's original signature cards from the archive. Yes, sir. She disappeared through a secured door. Michael watched her leave. His breathing became noticeably faster. He rubbed his palms against his trousers. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and glanced at the screen. 3 missed calls, 5 new text messages. He locked the phone immediately. I had never seen my son look frightened before, not during William's funeral, not during difficult family moments, not ever. But now, the confidence that had carried him through the entire morning was gone. In its place stood a man, silently waiting for something he desperately hoped would never arrive. And as I looked into his eyes, a painful realization settled over me. David Carter wasn't searching for proof anymore. Deep down, I believed he already knew exactly what he was about to find. The bank lobby had never felt so quiet. People were still talking. Printers continued humming. A child laughed somewhere near the entrance. Yet all of those ordinary sounds seemed strangely distant, as though I were hearing them from underwater. No one at our table spoke. Michael stared at the polished surface of the desk, avoiding my eyes. I kept looking at the destination account printed on the authorization form. Michael A. Jones. The words refused to disappear. David remained standing beside us, calm but alert. Years of experience had taught him not to rush difficult conversations. After several long minutes, the secure door behind the customer service area opened. Emily emerged carrying a thick gray archive binder. She handed it to David. "I found everything." He thanked her quietly and placed the binder on the table. Unlike the newer folders, this one looked worn from decades of careful storage. A small label on the spine read, "Jones, William and Isabella, opened 1993. My throat tightened. William had filled out those papers himself. I remembered the day vividly. We had celebrated by eating lunch at a small diner across the street because opening our first major savings account felt like the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. David carefully opened the binder. Inside were copies of nearly every significant signature I had ever provided to the bank. Account openings, certificate renewals, safe deposit box authorizations, beneficiary updates, loan releases. The earliest signatures looked younger, firmer. The newer ones reflected the slight tremor age had brought to my hand. But one thing remained remarkably consistent. That distinctive curve in my capital J. David laid the archived signatures beside the authorization forms Michael had brought that morning. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he examined each page with deliberate patience. Emily watched silently. Another senior employee quietly joined them. Neither interrupted. Finally, David looked at me. "Mrs. Jones, may I ask where you were on the date these authorization forms were supposedly signed?" He pointed toward a date printed beneath my signature. I adjusted my glasses. "September 18th. I frowned. "I'm not sure," Michael answered immediately. "She signed them at home." David didn't even look at him. I asked Mrs. Jones. I searched my memory. September. Then something surfaced. I think I was in the hospital. Michael's head snapped toward me. "No, that was earlier." I looked at him. "No, it wasn't. I remember because..." My voice caught. It was my heart. 3 months earlier, I'd experienced severe chest pain while gardening. My doctor had insisted on several days of observation at Riverside Methodist Hospital. Nancy had visited me every afternoon. Michael and Lauren had come only once because, according to Michael, work was unusually busy. I remembered the hospital room, the endless tests, the uncomfortable bed. I remembered every detail. David asked gently, "Do you remember the dates?" "I believe I was admitted on September 16th. "And discharged on the 19th. Emily's fingers immediately moved across her keyboard. She searched something in the bank's internal system. David remained perfectly still. Michael suddenly stood. "This has gone far enough. My mother doesn't remember dates accurately. I do remember this." My own voice surprised me. It sounded stronger than I expected. "I remember missing Nancy's birthday lunch because I was hospitalized." Michael looked at me in disbelief. "Mom, no, I remember." David quietly nodded. "Mrs. Jones, thank you." He turned toward Emily. "Please request verification." Emily understood immediately. Within moments, she was making a phone call, not to the hospital, to another department inside the bank. While she spoke quietly, David continued reviewing the documents. He pointed toward one particular signature. "This one appears unusually smooth." I frowned. "What do you mean? Most people in their late 60s show natural variations when signing multiple documents." He placed 5 authentic signatures side by side. "No two are perfectly identical." Then he compared them with the signatures from today's authorization forms. Everyone looked almost exactly the same angle, The same pressure. Even the tiny pauses between letters appeared identical, almost too identical. David spoke softly. When signatures become nearly perfect copies of one another, he paused. It sometimes suggests someone was copying a model rather than writing naturally. Michael slammed one hand onto the table. That's enough. Several customers turned to look. His breathing had become uneven. This is insulting. My mother signed those documents herself. David remained calm. Then additional verification should protect everyone involved. Michael laughed bitterly. You think I forged my own mother's signature? David answered carefully. I haven't accused anyone. I'm simply verifying an unusually large financial transaction. Michael looked toward me desperately. Mom, tell them. You know I'd never steal from you. My heart broke hearing those words. I wanted to believe him. More than anything, he was my son. The child I had carried, raised, comforted after nightmares, cheered at baseball games, watched graduate from college. Every instinct inside me wanted to defend him. Yet another part of me, the part William had always encouraged me to trust, kept whispering that something wasn't right. Emily ended her phone call. She quietly approached David and handed him a printed report. He read it carefully, then looked at me. Mrs. Jones, our records confirm there was unusual activity involving your accounts over the past 22 months. I blinked. What kind of activity? There have been multiple large internal transfers, several beneficiary modifications, changes to communication preferences, and repeated requests for document reissuance. I stared at him. I don't remember authorizing any of that. Michael spoke quickly. I handled those updates. For her convenience. David nodded. We're aware that Mr. Jones frequently accompanied you. He paused. However, many of those changes appear to have been processed on days when our records indicate Mrs. Jones never entered the branch. Silence. Complete silence. Even Michael didn't answer. David continued. We also reviewed surveillance logs attached to several transactions. My heartbeat accelerated. Surveillance? Yes. For transactions involving substantial assets, this branch retains security footage and visitor records. He looked directly at Michael. Several visits show Mr. Jones arriving alone. Michael's face drained of color. I had power of attorney. David opened another file. No, you did not. My breath caught. What? David turned toward me. There is no active financial power of attorney on file. I looked at Michael. You told me there was. He didn't answer. You said Dad had arranged everything. Still nothing. You told me you were authorized to handle my banking. Finally he spoke. I was helping you. That's all. David quietly shook his head. Our records don't support that. Emily placed another document onto the table. It contained visitor logs from multiple dates. Each entry listed only one customer, Michael Jones. No Isabella Jones. No joint appointment. Just Michael. I remembered Nancy telling me she had seen him visiting the bank repeatedly. I had dismissed her concerns. Now those visits were staring back at me in black ink. Tears blurred my vision. Why, I whispered, Michael, why didn't you tell me? He opened his mouth. No words came. For the first time in his life, my son had no explanation. David closed the archive binder gently. Mrs. Jones, I'm going to recommend that we immediately suspend today's transaction. He paused before continuing. And because of the inconsistencies we've identified, I'm also placing a temporary hold on any additional transfers until our fraud department completes a full investigation. Fraud! The word echoed through my mind like a church bell. Not misunderstanding, not paperwork. Fraud. I looked across the table at Michael. His shoulders had slumped. His confidence was gone. His carefully rehearsed answers had vanished. For nearly 2 years, I had believed he was protecting me from complicated financial decisions. Instead, it appeared someone else had been protecting me all along. A cautious bank manager who had looked at one signature and refused to ignore the tiny difference everyone else might have overlooked. I sat motionless as David's words settled over me. Fraud investigation. Those 2 words felt impossible to connect with my own family. Fraud happened to strangers in newspaper articles. It happened to people who answered suspicious phone calls or clicked dangerous emails. It wasn't supposed to happen between a mother and her only son. David gave us a few moments in silence before speaking again. Mrs. Jones, I'd like to move this conversation into my office. I nodded weakly. I think I'd like that. He turned to Michael. Mr. Jones, you're welcome to accompany us. Michael stood without saying a word. His shoulders were rigid, and he kept his eyes fixed on the floor as we followed David through a glass door into a private office overlooking the lobby. Once the door closed, the room felt strangely insulated from the busy world outside. David invited me to sit across from his desk. Emily quietly placed several folders beside him before leaving. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," she said gently. David thanked her, then folded his hands. "Mrs. Jones, before we go any further, I want you to understand something." I looked at him. "Our responsibility is to protect our customers, especially when something doesn't seem right. I appreciate that. I only wish we'd met under different circumstances." "So do I." He opened the first folder. "After noticing today's signature discrepancy, I asked our internal fraud department to conduct an immediate preliminary review." He turned the file toward me. Rows of transactions filled the pages, dates, amounts, account numbers, transfers. At first, the numbers meant very little. Then my eyes caught one figure, $48,000, another, $36,500, then another, $22,750. My hands began trembling. "What are these transfers? From your savings and investment accounts?" I stared at the pages. "There must be some mistake." David slowly shook his head. "I'm afraid there isn't." He continued turning pages. "There are 37 separate transactions over the past 22 months. Some were relatively small. Others exceeded $50,000. Each page felt like another punch to the chest. I couldn't even process the totals anymore. The numbers blurred together. "How much?" I whispered. David hesitated. "I believe you deserve an exact answer." He picked up a calculator, entered several figures, then turned the screen toward me. 684, 320.17. I stopped breathing. "No." The word barely escaped my lips. "No." William and I had spent decades building that retirement fund. We skipped expensive vacations, drove our cars until they were nearly worn out, packed lunches instead of eating out, invested every extra dollar we could spare. That money wasn't simply savings. It represented birthdays spent at home instead of resorts, old furniture we chose not to replace. Over time, William worked when I wanted him to rest. 38 years of teaching. 42 years of marriage, a lifetime, and now nearly $700,000 had disappeared. I looked at Michael. His face was pale. He still refused to meet my eyes. "Tell me this isn't true." Silence. "Michael." I could hear my own voice breaking. "Please, tell me they're wrong." He swallowed hard. Then he stopped. That silence answered more than words ever could. David quietly continued. "The good news," he paused, "is that not all of the money has left the banking system." I blinked through my tears. "What do you mean?" "Many transfers remained within accounts we can immediately freeze." Hope flickered for the first time. "So, some can be recovered." "We believe so, but we'll need to act quickly." He opened another folder. Our review also found something else. He slid several printed emails across the desk. I frowned. "I've never seen these." "They were sent to the email address registered for your online banking." The address wasn't mine. It belonged to Michael. My stomach turned. "I don't even use that email." "I know. Our records show it replaced your original contact information 19 months ago." "I never asked for that." David nodded. "We found no evidence that you personally requested the change." He opened another document. "This is your mailing preference history." I scanned the page. 3 separate requests had changed my statements from paper delivery to electronic delivery. Then another request redirected tax documents. Then another changed notification settings. Every change ensured that I would never receive important financial information at home. I felt sick. "That's why the mail stopped coming." David looked at me gently. "Yes." I remembered standing in my kitchen months earlier, staring at the nearly empty mail basket. I had questioned it, briefly, then convinced myself I was simply getting older. No. Someone had made sure the evidence never reached my mailbox. I slowly turned toward Michael. "You told me everything was digital now." He rubbed both hands across his face. "I didn't want you worrying." "Worrying?" My voice rose despite myself. "You took away every way I had to know what was happening." "I was protecting you." "No." The word came out stronger than I expected. "You were hiding something." His shoulders sagged. David opened yet another folder. "This concerns beneficiary information." I frowned. "What about it?" "Several investment accounts listed charitable organizations and extended family members exactly as your late husband had designated." He slid another page toward me. "They were changed." I looked closer. The updated beneficiary for nearly every account listed only one name, Michael A. Jones. Tears rolled freely down my face. William spent months planning those. He wanted money set aside for scholarships, our church, my sister. He thought about everyone. I looked at my son. You erased all of it. Michael finally looked at me. His eyes were red. I wasn't thinking clearly. When? I asked quietly. When exactly weren't you thinking clearly? When you changed the beneficiaries, when you redirected my mail, when you changed my email, when you moved my money. Each question landed like another stone. He had no answers. David spoke carefully. Our preliminary review also identified transfers into 2 business accounts. Business accounts. Registered to Jones Construction Consulting, Michael's company. My heart sank even further. So the money wasn't just sitting somewhere. No, David answered honestly. A significant portion appears to have been used. I closed my eyes. Images flooded my mind. Michael's new SUV, the expensive watch, the luxury vacations he mentioned, the renovations to his home. For 2 years, I had admired his apparent success. Now, I couldn't stop wondering how much of it had been built with my retirement. A knock sounded softly at the office door. Emily entered quietly. David? The fraud department has completed their initial hold requests. He nodded. Thank you. She looked at me with genuine compassion. We've frozen every account we could identify. There are also 2 external wire requests pending. David stood immediately. Cancel them. They've already been stopped. For the first time that morning, I saw relief cross David's face. He turned back toward me. Mrs. Jones? If Emily hadn't questioned today's signature, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I understood. Another hour, perhaps another day, and those remaining funds might have disappeared forever. I looked through the office window toward the busy bank lobby. Customers continued depositing paychecks, opening savings accounts, planning retirements, living ordinary lives. None of them knew that just beyond the glass, one bank employee's willingness to question a single signature had likely saved what remained of my future. Then I looked back at my son, the little boy I had once taught to write his own name, the young man whose first bank account William and I had opened on his 16th birthday. Somewhere along the way, the child I had trusted with my heart had become a man capable of betraying it, and somehow, that realization hurt far more than the missing money ever could. For several long minutes, no one spoke. The silence inside David's office felt almost unbearable. I kept staring at Michael, hoping he would finally look at me and say the words every mother longs to hear in moments like this. Mom, this is all a misunderstanding. Instead, he sat with his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. He looked exhausted, older, as though the weight of whatever secret he had been carrying had finally become too heavy to hide. I was the one who finally broke the silence. Tell me the truth. My voice was barely above a whisper. No more explanations. No more paperwork. No more telling me I forgot. I deserve the truth. Michael closed his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded nothing like the confident businessman who had walked into the bank earlier that morning. It started almost 2 years ago. Every word landed heavily. My company lost a major contract. I frowned. You told me business was booming. It was... He shook his head. Until it wasn't. He leaned back slowly. The commercial housing market slowed. 2 developers backed out of projects. I had payroll due. Equipment leases. Insurance. I thought I'd recover in a few months. David remained silent, allowing him to continue. I borrowed from the business, then from my personal savings. I refinanced the house. I maxed out every line of credit I had. I listened without interrupting. I thought one more contract would fix everything. But it never came. He rubbed his forehead. I owed suppliers. I owed employees. I owed the bank. My heart ached, despite everything. Not because of the money. Because I had never known he was suffering. Why didn't you tell me? I couldn't. Why? I was ashamed. His voice cracked. Dad always believed I'd build something successful. I couldn't admit I'd failed. I thought about William. He had never measured success by money. He cared about honesty, responsibility, character. If Michael had simply gone to his father years earlier and admitted he was struggling, William would have helped him create a plan. Not because he enjoyed solving financial problems, because he loved his son. Michael continued. At first, I only moved a small amount. I told myself I'd put it back before you ever noticed. 5,000? Then 10. Then 20. I closed my eyes. So every time you took more, you believed it was temporary. He nodded slowly. I kept thinking the next contract would save me. The next client. The next month. But every time I fell farther behind. David quietly opened another folder. Our review suggests the transfers became larger over time. Michael gave a defeated nod. Because the business kept getting worse. I wasn't gambling. I wasn't buying boats or vacation homes. I was trying to keep the company alive. His words sounded desperate, almost pleading. Then he looked directly at me. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I stared at him for several seconds. No, he blinked. You redirected my bank statements. You changed my email. You changed beneficiaries Dad spent months planning. You lied every single week. You watched me thank you for helping me. You let me tell everyone at church how proud I was of my son. My voice trembled. And somehow, you believe you weren't hurting me. His shoulders slumped. I know how it looks. It looks exactly like what it is. He lowered his head. I know. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw tears forming in his eyes. Not dramatic tears, not theatrical. Quiet tears filled with exhaustion and regret. I never expected it to go this far. I couldn't stop myself. Neither did I. The room fell silent again. After a while, David spoke carefully. Mr. Jones, were all of the transfers used for business expenses? Michael hesitated. Most. David noticed the hesitation immediately. Most, Michael swallowed. I paid off some personal debts. What kind of debts? He looked embarrassed. Credit cards. Medical bills? The mortgage. I nodded slowly. So when Lauren told me how wonderful business was, she didn't know. He shook his head. No, I never told her. She thought everything was fine. That surprised me. I had assumed Lauren had been involved from the beginning. Perhaps she wasn't. Perhaps she too had been living inside the story Michael created. David continued asking questions. Were any other individuals involved in preparing these documents? No. Did anyone assist you in changing Mrs. Jones's banking preferences? No. Did anyone at the bank knowingly help you? Michael looked up immediately. No. Absolutely not. I acted alone. David wrote several notes. I appreciate your honesty. Michael gave a bitter laugh. A little late for honesty. No one disagreed. I reached into my purse. Slowly I removed William's letter. The paper had become slightly wrinkled from being folded so many times. I unfolded it carefully. Michael watched me. What is that? A letter your father left? I handed it across the desk. He read silently. As his eyes reached the underlined sentence, his face crumpled. Never surrender control of your signature, not even to someone you love. His lips trembled. He knew. No. I shook my head gently. He didn't know this would happen. He simply understood people. He understood temptation. Michael stared at the letter. I wish I'd read this 2 years ago. So do I. Another long silence settled over us. Finally he whispered, I wanted to tell you. When? The first time, the 10th time, the 30th. I don't know. I'd convinced myself that after one more project I'd replace everything. And then I'd confess. But every month the hole got deeper. His voice broke completely. I became trapped. I listened quietly. For the first time all day I saw not just the man who had betrayed me, I also saw the frightened little boy who had always believed mistakes became monsters if you hid them long enough. Only this mistake had grown until it consumed nearly everything. I took a slow breath. If you had come to me the day your company started failing, I would have helped. His head snapped upward. I know. No. I don't think you do. I wiped away another tear. I would have sold this house if it meant protecting you. I would have delayed my retirement. I would have eaten canned soup every day. I would have done anything. Because you're my son. I paused. But you never gave me that choice. The pain on his face deepened. You decided that lying was easier than asking. And every lie made the next one easier. He covered his face with both hands. I'm sorry. The words were sincere. I believed that. But sincerity couldn't erase 2 years of deception. David quietly closed the folders on his desk. Mrs. Jones, the investigation will continue regardless of today's conversation. I nodded. I understand. There will likely be interviews with our fraud department and law enforcement. Michael didn't react. almost as though he already knew what was coming. I looked at my son one last time. I still love you. His shoulders began shaking. But loving you? I struggled to finish the sentence. Doesn't mean I can protect you from what you've done. For the first time that day, Michael didn't argue. He simply nodded. Because deep down, he knew I was right. And so did I. The first police detective arrived less than an hour later. Until that moment, everything had still felt strangely unreal. Painful, shocking, heartbreaking. But unreal. The appearance of Detective Ryan Cooper changed that. He was a man in his early 50s with kind eyes and a calm voice that immediately put people at ease. Unlike the detectives I had seen on television, he wasn't intimidating. He didn't storm into the room asking accusatory questions. Instead, he introduced himself politely and shook my hand. Mrs. Jones, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. So am I. He glanced toward Michael. I understand this is difficult for everyone. Difficult. The word seemed painfully inadequate. Ryan explained that because the bank had identified what appeared to be unauthorized financial activity involving a vulnerable adult, they were legally required to report it immediately. No one in the room argued. David handed him copies of the preliminary findings while Emily quietly brought bottled water for everyone. The kindness of complete strangers contrasted sharply with the betrayal sitting only a few feet away from me. Ryan spent the next 30 minutes asking simple questions. When was the last time you personally reviewed your account statements? I don't remember. Did you authorize changes to your email address? No. Did you knowingly transfer funds into your son's personal account? Absolutely not. Did you give Mr. Jones financial power of attorney? No. Each answer made my heart sink a little further, because every no represented another lie Michael had allowed me to live with. When Ryan turned toward Michael, the room became noticeably quieter. Mr. Jones, you have the right to decline answering questions until you've spoken with legal counsel. Michael nodded. I understand. Would you still like to answer voluntarily? Yes. He looked exhausted, almost relieved, as though carrying the truth had become more painful than revealing it. Ryan asked many of the same questions David already had. Michael admitted changing the communication preferences. He admitted accessing my online banking. He admitted preparing the transfer forms. He admitted moving the money. But one answer surprised everyone. No one else knew. Ryan looked up. You're saying your wife had no knowledge of any of this? None. You never told her? No. Ryan made another note. Did anyone encourage you? No. This was entirely my decision. For several moments, only the scratching of Ryan's pen filled the room. Finally, he closed his notebook. Thank you. He stood and spoke quietly with David outside the office. I couldn't hear their conversation. Michael remained seated across from me. Neither of us spoke. There was almost nothing left to say. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Lauren. I stared at the screen. Michael looked up immediately. Please answer. I hesitated before pressing the green button. Hello? Isabella? Lauren sounded frantic. Where are you? At the bank. I know. Michael won't answer his phone. What happened? I looked across at my son. His face had turned pale again. I took a slow breath. You should come here. There was a long silence. Then Lauren quietly asked, Is it serious? Yes. She arrived 40 minutes later. The moment she entered David's office, she looked from my tear-stained face to Michael's expression. She immediately understood something terrible had happened. What is going on? No one answered. She looked at Michael. Talk to me. He couldn't. Ryan introduced himself and asked whether she would be willing to wait in another office for a few minutes. Instead, she folded her arms. I'd rather hear it now. Ryan glanced at me. I nodded. She deserved the truth. He summarized the situation gently. Unauthorized transfers, signature concerns, ongoing investigation, potential criminal charges. Lauren listened without interrupting. As he spoke, the color slowly drained from her face. When he finished, she turned toward Michael. Tell me he's wrong. Michael lowered his head. He isn't. The sound she made wasn't a scream. It wasn't even crying. It was the quiet gasp of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just shattered. She struggled to find words. You've been taking your mother's money. I was trying to save the company. Our company? My company. She stared at him. What do you mean, your company? I thought we were doing well. Michael closed his eyes. We haven't been doing well for almost 2 years. Lauren looked genuinely confused. What? The projects, the bonuses, the vacations? I financed most of it. You financed it with your mother's retirement. Michael couldn't answer. Lauren stepped backward as though he had become a stranger. You lied to me. I know. You let me thank your mother for supporting us. I know. You let me sit in her house and tell her how proud I was of you. Tears streamed down her face. I believed every word. My heart broke for her. I had spent months wondering whether she was part of the deception. Watching her now, I realized she was another victim, perhaps in a different way, but a victim nonetheless. She slowly turned toward me. Isabella? I swear to you, I didn't know. I believed her, not because I wanted to, because the shock on her face couldn't be faked. I reached across the table and gently took her trembling hand. I know. She burst into tears. I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Across the room, Michael quietly cried into his hands. No one looked at him. Ryan allowed everyone a few minutes before speaking again. There is one more issue we need to discuss. David handed him another report. Ryan looked at Michael. Our financial investigators located additional loans secured against your business. Michael nodded. I expected that. They're currently in default. I know. Several creditors have already begun collection proceedings. Lauren looked stunned. You told me the business loan was almost paid off. I lied. You told me our mortgage refinance was for renovations. I lied. You told me everything was under control. I know. You lied. Every sentence struck harder than the one before it. The lies hadn't stopped with me. They had spread through every relationship in his life. Friends, business partners, his wife, even himself. Ryan carefully closed the file. I don't believe there are any further questions today. He handed Michael a business card. My office will contact you within the next 48 hours. Michael accepted it silently. As Ryan prepared to leave, he paused beside me. Mrs. Jones, I know this is painful. It is, but I've investigated many financial exploitation cases. He hesitated. Most victims never discover the truth until every dollar is gone. I looked toward David through the office window. If he hadn't noticed, Ryan nodded, I know. After everyone else stepped outside, I remained alone in David's office for a few moments. The room was finally quiet. Through the glass walls, I watched customers continue with their ordinary lives, opening accounts, depositing paychecks, planning for the future, just as William and I had once done. David entered quietly. I wanted to check on you. I smiled weakly. I've had better mornings. I imagine so. I looked down at William's letter still resting on the desk. He spent our whole marriage trying to protect me. David followed my gaze. He still did. I frowned. How? David looked thoughtful. There may be something your husband arranged years ago that you don't know about. I looked up. What do you mean? He smiled gently. I'd rather let Robert Hayes explain. He's already on his way. My heartbeat quickened. William's attorney, the man whose name appeared in that letter. For the second time that day, I realized my husband had left behind more than memories. Somehow, he had also left behind one final plan, one I was only beginning to understand. I looked at David in confusion. Robert is coming here. He nodded. I called him shortly after we confirmed the signature discrepancy. You know Robert? We've worked together for many years. He smiled faintly. Your husband made sure of that. Before I could ask another question, there was a gentle knock on the office door. David stood. That should be him. The door opened, and Robert Hayes stepped inside, carrying the same worn brown leather briefcase I remembered from William's funeral. He looked older than I recalled, his silver hair thinner around the temples, but his posture remained straight and confident. The moment he saw me, his expression softened. Isabella. I stood without thinking. Robert. He walked over and wrapped me in a gentle hug. I'm sorry we have to meet like this. So am I. When we pulled apart, he studied my face carefully. I wish William were here. The words caught in my throat. So do I. Robert greeted David with a firm handshake before taking a seat across from me. I understand today's been overwhelming. I don't even know where to begin. You don't have to. He placed the leather briefcase on the table and slowly opened it. Inside were several neatly organized folders. One bore William's name in bold lettering. Seeing my husband's handwriting again made my chest tighten. Robert removed the folder carefully. Before William passed away, he asked me to keep several documents. I frowned. He never told me. He didn't want to worry you. That sounded exactly like William. He told me something very specific. Robert unfolded a typed memorandum. If anything unusual ever happens with our financial accounts after I'm gone, make sure Bella learns the truth, but only if it's truly necessary. Tears welled in my eyes. He really said that? Robert nodded. He loved you enough to prepare for possibilities he hoped would never happen. David quietly remained by the window, giving us space. Robert continued, About 5 years before William passed away, the two of us had lunch. He had recently attended a seminar on financial exploitation targeting older adults. I listened carefully. He came back deeply unsettled. Not because he believed you were vulnerable. Robert smiled. He believed you trusted people too easily. Despite everything, I laughed softly. That sounds like him. He said something I'll never forget. Robert glanced down at his notes. Bella always believes the best in people. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with her. He paused. But it's also the reason someone could someday take advantage of her. A tear rolled down my cheek. William had never criticized my trusting nature. He had simply tried to protect it. Robert removed another document. This is an instruction letter William signed. I looked at the date, 3 years before his death. He requested several safeguards on your primary retirement accounts. I blinked. What kind of safeguards? David stepped closer. This is where our bank became involved. Robert handed me the document. It authorized enhanced verification procedures for unusually large withdrawals or transfers after William's death. The instructions were remarkably detailed. Any transaction exceeding a certain amount required additional signature verification. If inconsistencies appeared, the branch manager was to review archived signature cards personally. If concerns remained, the transaction was to be suspended until the account holder could independently confirm authorization. I looked up in disbelief. So, David finished the sentence. That's exactly the procedure we followed today. I stared at the pages. William created all this. He did, Robert nodded. He insisted on it. He told me he wasn't afraid of strangers. He was afraid of people making emotional decisions under pressure. I remembered every time Michael had hurried me, every time he'd said just sign here, every time he'd told me not to worry. William had anticipated none of those specific events, yet somehow he had prepared for them anyway. Robert continued. He also insisted that I receive notification if the bank ever questioned a significant transaction involving your accounts. I looked toward David. So you called him? I did. As soon as I believed something was seriously wrong. Robert leaned forward. Isabella, I know today has shattered your trust, but I don't want it to destroy your faith in everyone. There were people quietly doing exactly what William hoped they would. I looked around the room. David, Emily, Robert. Complete professionals who could easily have processed paperwork without asking another question. Instead, they chose to look closer, to ask, to verify, to protect. Robert opened another folder. There's one more thing William wanted you to have. He removed a sealed envelope. Across the front in William's handwriting were the words, For Bella when you need courage. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was only a single sheet of paper. No legal instructions. No financial advice. Just a handwritten letter. My beautiful Bella. If you're reading this, then something difficult has happened. First, I want you to remember something. Being betrayed doesn't mean you were foolish. It means you loved someone enough to trust them. My vision blurred. Never let another person's bad choices convince you that kindness was your mistake. I covered my mouth to stop myself from crying aloud. William knew me better than I knew myself. He knew that if anyone I loved ever hurt me, I would blame myself first. The letter continued. If someone disappoints you, don't spend the rest of your life wondering what you should have done differently. Spend it becoming strong enough that no one can ever take away your independence again. I read the last sentence 3 times. And remember this, Bella. I didn't spend 42 years loving you because you were perfect. I loved you because your heart always chose compassion before suspicion. Please don't lose that heart. I lowered the letter slowly. The room was silent. Robert quietly handed me a tissue. I've carried that envelope for years. He made me promise I wouldn't give it to you unless it truly mattered. I smiled through my tears. He always kept his promises. And he expected the rest of us to keep ours. David sat across from me. Mrs. Jones, our fraud department has already completed emergency actions. Every account we could legally freeze has been secured. Several transfers have already been reversed. Hope flickered again. How much? We're still calculating, but we believe the majority of the remaining balances can be recovered. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Robert closed his briefcase. The legal process won't be easy. I know. There may be hearings. There may be difficult family conversations. I understand. He looked at me kindly. But you'll never face them alone. For the first time since walking into the bank that morning, I believed him. William wasn't sitting beside me anymore, yet somehow, through careful planning, loyal friends, and people who took their responsibilities seriously, he was still protecting me. His voice no longer came from across the breakfast table. It came from every safeguard he had quietly built before saying goodbye. And sitting there in David Carter's office holding the last letter my husband would ever write to me, I finally understood something that grief had hidden for far too long. Love doesn't always end when a person dies. Sometimes love continues through the plans they made, the promises they inspired, and the people they trusted to stand beside you when they no longer could. 3 weeks after everything unraveled at the bank, my life no longer resembled the quiet retirement I had once known. Nearly every day began with another phone call, another meeting, another document requiring my attention. Detective Ryan Cooper checked in regularly with updates from the investigation. David Carter called whenever the bank completed another stage of its internal review. Robert Hayes handled a mountain of legal paperwork I barely understood. If someone had told me a month earlier that I would spend my retirement discussing forensic accounting, digital banking records, and financial recovery procedures, I would have laughed. Now it had become my reality. One crisp November morning, Robert arrived at my house carrying a thick folder. He smiled as he stepped inside. "I've got some good news." I hadn't heard those words in what felt like forever. "Please tell me I needed to hear them." "I think you do." We sat together in William's old office. For the first time since his death, the room no longer felt like a museum of memories. I'd begun using the desk again, sorting papers, learning where every account was held, keeping my own records. William would have been proud. Robert opened the folder. The court-approved temporary asset preservation orders. I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means Michael can no longer move, sell, or hide the remaining assets connected to this investigation. So everything is frozen." Nearly everything. He handed me a summary sheet. The numbers were astonishing. Several bank accounts had been frozen within hours of David's report. The 2 business accounts were locked before additional withdrawals could be made. An investment portfolio Michael had quietly built using transferred funds had also been identified. Even his luxury SUV had been listed as a potentially recoverable asset because investigators believed part of its purchase came directly from my retirement savings. I stared at the pages. So much of it can actually come back. Robert nodded. "More than we initially expected." I closed my eyes. Not because of the money, because William's lifetime of careful planning hadn't been completely destroyed. His sacrifices hadn't vanished overnight. A week later, Ryan invited me to review the investigation's progress. He met me in a quiet conference room rather than a police station, sensing it would make me more comfortable. "I thought you'd like to know where things stand." "I appreciate that." He spread several charts across the table. The investigation had reconstructed nearly every transfer over the previous 22 months. Each transaction formed part of a timeline. Looking at it felt like watching trust disappear one piece at a time. The first transfer had been only $5,000, small enough that it blended into normal account activity. The next was larger, then another. Over time, Michael became bolder. Ryan pointed toward one section. "This period concerns us the most. Nearly $200,000 had been transferred over 6 months. What happened? His business was collapsing. He was borrowing against future contracts that never materialized." Ryan looked at me sympathetically. "The financial pressure appears to have accelerated his decisions." I nodded slowly. "I believe that." He looked surprised. "You do?" "I believe he became desperate." I paused. "But desperation doesn't erase responsibility." Ryan gave a quiet nod. "I agree." Before I left, he hesitated. "There's something else." "What?" "Michael has decided to cooperate fully." "What does that mean?" "He's admitted responsibility for every unauthorized transfer." I stared at him. He confessed, yes. He provided passwords, financial records, business documents. He isn't disputing the evidence. For some reason, hearing that hurt almost as much as discovering the truth in the first place. Some small part of me had continued hoping there would be another explanation. Another missing piece. There wasn't. Michael had admitted everything. A few days later, he asked if I would visit him. Robert offered to accompany me. I think I'd rather go alone. The meeting took place in a quiet attorney's office where Michael had been meeting with legal counsel. When I entered, he stood immediately. He looked different. His expensive suits were gone. He wore a simple gray sweater and jeans. His face appeared thinner. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. For the first time in years, he looked less like a successful executive and more like the frightened little boy who used to run to me after scraping his knees. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Michael." We sat across from each other. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, he slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" "Everything." I opened it carefully. Inside were account numbers, investment statements, property records, passwords, a handwritten list of every asset he owned. "I've signed everything over." I looked up. "What do you mean? The house, the investments, my vehicles, anything that can be sold?" He swallowed. "If it helps repay what I took." "It's yours." Tears filled my eyes. "I never wanted your life." "I know. I just wanted the truth." "I know." He looked down at his hands. "I've been thinking about Dad." "So have I." I kept asking myself what he'd say if he were sitting here. I smiled sadly. "I don't think he'd yell." Michael nodded. "No. He'd probably be disappointed." "I think he'd be heartbroken." The room fell silent again. Finally he whispered, "I've destroyed everything." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "No. You've destroyed trust." "Those aren't the same thing." He looked at me. "Can trust come back?" I answered honestly. "I don't know. It won't happen quickly. It may never be exactly what it was. But healing?" I took a slow breath. "Healing begins with telling the truth." He nodded slowly. "I'm done lying." "I believe you." Those words surprised both of us. After everything that had happened, I still believed him. Not because he deserved automatic forgiveness. Because for the first time in nearly 2 years, he wasn't asking me to believe a carefully crafted story. He was simply accepting the consequences of the truth. Several weeks later, David called with another update. "Mrs. Jones." "Yes." "I thought you'd like to know. The recovery process is nearly complete." "Really? We've secured approximately 88% of the transferred assets." I sat down immediately. 88%. Some funds were spent and can't be recovered. "But thanks to the early intervention," he paused, "most of your retirement has been preserved." I closed my eyes. "Thank you." "No," he answered quietly. "Thank your husband." If William hadn't insisted on enhanced verification procedures years ago, today's outcome would have been very different. After hanging up, I walked outside onto my back porch. The maple tree William had planted when Michael was born had shed nearly all its leaves. Winter was approaching. The branches looked bare, yet I knew something they seemed to contradict. Bare branches aren't dead. They're simply preparing for another season. As I stood there watching the afternoon sunlight filter through the empty limbs, I realized my family would never return to what it had once been. Some wounds leave permanent scars, some relationships are forever changed. But thanks to one observant bank manager, one loyal attorney, one determined detective, and one husband whose love extended far beyond his lifetime, my future had not been stolen, it had been rescued. And now, for the first time since walking into that bank, I finally believed I could begin building a new life from everything that remained. Winter arrived quietly that year. The first snowfall covered my front yard in a blanket of white, softening the sharp edges of a year I never could have imagined. For the first time in months, there were no emergency meetings on my calendar, no interviews with investigators, no urgent phone calls from the bank. The legal process continued in the background, but my role had become much smaller. Robert handled most of the paperwork, and Ryan updated me only when something significant happened. Life, hesitant and uncertain, began moving forward again. One Saturday morning, I stood in William's old office holding a cardboard box. For almost 2 years after his death, I had avoided changing anything in that room. His sweater still hung behind the door. His favorite coffee mug still rested on the bookshelf. His desk calendar remained open to the week before he passed away. Keeping everything exactly the same had felt like preserving him. Now I finally understood that memories didn't live inside furniture. They lived inside me. I carefully folded his sweater and placed it inside the box. Not to hide it, to protect it. I smiled as I found one of his old notebooks. Inside were grocery lists mixed with engineering calculations, reminders to buy birdseed, and little notes about birthdays he never wanted to forget. Near the back of the notebook I found another sentence written in his familiar handwriting. "Teach yourself something new every year." I laughed softly. "Even now you're giving me homework." That afternoon I drove to the bank alone. It was the first time I had entered the building without Michael since William died. Emily greeted me immediately. "Mrs. Jones." Her smile was genuine. "It's wonderful to see you. It's good to be back." David joined us a few moments later. "I was hoping you'd stop by. I came for a reason." He gestured toward his office. "Come in." Once we were seated, I took a deep breath. "I want to learn." David smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. For too long, I let everyone else handle our finances. I don't want to do that anymore." "You don't have to become an accountant," he chuckled. "You simply need to understand enough to stay in control." Over the next several weeks, David and one of the bank's financial specialists patiently walked me through everything: how to review monthly statements, how to recognize unusual transactions, how to verify beneficiaries, how to use online banking securely, how to set transaction alerts on my phone, how to create strong passwords, how to monitor my credit. At first, it felt overwhelming. I wrote pages of notes. Sometimes I asked the same question twice, occasionally 3 times. Not once did anyone make me feel embarrassed. One afternoon, I successfully reviewed my investments online without asking for help. It was a small accomplishment, but when I arrived home, I found myself smiling. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where my money was. More importantly, I knew how to keep it that way. Nancy noticed the change in me almost immediately. "You seem lighter." "I think I am." We sat together on my porch with steaming cups of tea. I spent so long believing I was too old to learn new things. "And I was wrong," Nancy laughed. "I could have told you that." She leaned back in her chair. "So, any plans now that life has settled down?" I surprised myself with my answer. "Actually, I've been thinking about traveling." Her eyebrows shot upward. "Traveling?" "William always wanted to drive through New England during autumn. We kept putting it off. Work, responsibilities, timing. There was always another reason." Nancy grinned. "So what's stopping you now?" I looked out across the yard. "Nothing." 2 months later, we found ourselves driving through Vermont, surrounded by mountains glowing with brilliant shades of red, gold, and orange. William should have been beside me. I missed him every single day. But instead of feeling guilty for smiling, I imagined him smiling with me. At one roadside cafe, Nancy raised her coffee mug. "To new beginnings." I lifted mine. "To keeping promises." She tilted her head. "What promise?" "The one William left me. To stay independent." When I returned home, another opportunity found me. Our church began organizing workshops for older adults about financial safety. The pastor approached me after Sunday service. "Would you be willing to share your experience?" My first instinct was to refuse. The story still embarrassed me. People would know my son had stolen from me. They would know how easily I had been deceived. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table staring at William's last letter. One sentence stood out. "Never let another person's bad choices convince you that kindness was your mistake." I folded the letter carefully. The following morning, I called the pastor. "I'll do it." The first workshop attracted only 12 people. Most were retired. Several admitted they let their children handle everything. One gentleman laughed. "My daughter says passwords are too complicated for me." A woman quietly confessed she hadn't opened her own bank statement in nearly 3 years. As I listened, I realized how easily my story could have become theirs. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't focus on Michael. I focused on myself. I thought trust meant never asking questions. It doesn't. Trust and accountability can exist together. I loved my husband completely. He still encouraged me to understand every document I signed. I love my son completely, but love should never require giving away your independence. Afterward, several people stayed behind. One widow hugged me tightly. "Because of you, I'm calling my bank tomorrow." Another gentleman smiled. "I'm making my own online account this week." Driving home that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since retiring from teaching: purpose. Perhaps my classroom had simply changed. Instead of 7-year-olds learning multiplication, I now stood before grandparents learning how to protect themselves. Different students, the same calling. One evening, Robert stopped by with the final recovery report. He smiled as he handed it to me. "Everything is complete." I scanned the summary. Most of the stolen funds had been recovered. The remaining losses, while painful, would not threaten my future. My retirement remained secure. William's charitable gifts had been restored. The scholarship fund in his name would continue exactly as he intended. I closed the folder and looked toward the photograph sitting on my mantel. William smiled back at me from a picture taken during our 40th wedding anniversary. "I think we did it," I whispered. "Not perfectly, not without pain. But we had protected the life we built together." And standing there in the quiet comfort of my home, I realized something extraordinary. The strongest part of me had never been the woman who trusted everyone, nor was it the woman who survived betrayal. It was the woman who chose to keep living with wisdom instead of fear. Almost a year passed before I saw Michael again. The legal process had moved slowly, just as Robert warned it would. Michael had accepted responsibility for every unauthorized transfer. Because he cooperated fully, surrendered his remaining assets voluntarily, and helped investigators recover nearly all of the missing funds, the court took those actions into account during sentencing. He still faced serious legal consequences, but the judge also recognized that he had confessed rather than forcing everyone through a lengthy trial. None of that erased what had happened. It simply meant the truth had finally replaced the lies. Robert called me the day the case officially closed. "It's over." I sat quietly in my living room staring at the Christmas tree William and I used to decorate together. "I wasn't sure this day would ever come." "You handled it with remarkable grace." "I didn't always feel graceful," he laughed softly. "Very few people do." After hanging up, I walked into William's office. It no longer looked like a shrine. It had become my workspace. The filing cabinet was organized again. Only this time, every folder had been labeled by my own hand. Every password was written inside a secure notebook I understood. Every investment statement had been reviewed personally. For the first time in our marriage, and certainly for the first time since William died, I knew every detail of our finances. Not because I had been forced to, because I had chosen to learn. A few weeks later, Michael wrote asking if I would meet him. I spent several days thinking about it. Nancy told me I didn't owe him anything. Robert reminded me the decision was entirely mine. David simply said, "Whatever you choose, make sure it brings you peace." In the end, I agreed. We met in a quiet visitation room at the correctional facility where he was serving his sentence. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him. Not happier, just honest. There were no expensive clothes, no polished confidence, no rehearsed explanations, only my son. He sat down across from me. "Thank you for coming. I almost didn't, I know." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into a folder. "I can't give this to you directly." He looked toward the correctional officer. "It was approved." He slid a handwritten notebook across the table. "What is it?" "I've been writing." "About what?" "Everything. My mistakes, Dad, you, my childhood, the lies. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I finally stopped lying to myself." I rested my hand on the notebook. "I'll read it." He nodded gratefully. "I've also started helping in the financial literacy program here." I looked up. "The what?" "We teach inmates basic budgeting, debt management, how small financial decisions become bigger ones." He smiled sadly. "I suppose I'm uniquely qualified to explain what happens when pride replaces honesty." That sentence stayed with me. Pride replaces honesty. Wasn't that exactly what had happened? Not greed at first. Pride, the refusal to admit failure, the desperate need to appear successful, the lie that grew until it swallowed everything. I think your father would have respected that. Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I hope someday." He stopped. "I know," I answered gently. "You hope to earn trust again." He nodded. "I don't know if I can," I answered truthfully. "I don't know either. But trust isn't rebuilt through promises. It's rebuilt through years of choices. I understand." When our visit ended, he stood. "I love you, Mom." I looked at him carefully. For the first time in a very long time, those words weren't being used to distract me, or manipulate me, or persuade me. They were simply true. "I love you too." Then I added something I never thought I'd say. "And because I love you, I hope you become the man your father always believed you could be." I walked away without looking back. Some endings don't require dramatic embraces. Some simply require honesty. The following spring, David invited me to speak at the bank's annual community seminar on fraud prevention. I smiled when I received the invitation. A year earlier, I had walked through those same doors believing my life was falling apart. Now I was returning to help protect someone else's. Standing behind the podium, I looked across the audience, retirees, young families, bank employees, college students, people from every stage of life. David introduced me warmly, then stepped aside. I took a deep breath. A year ago, I walked into this bank believing I was signing routine paperwork. A quiet murmur spread through the audience. I believed the greatest danger to older adults came from strangers. I paused. I was wrong. The greatest danger isn't always a stranger. Sometimes it's believing that love means you should stop asking questions. The room became completely silent. I trusted my son. I don't regret loving him. I regret believing that love required me to stop paying attention. I looked toward David. And one observant bank manager reminded me of something my husband spent 42 years trying to teach me. I smiled. Protecting yourself isn't an act of distrust. It's an act of responsibility. After the seminar ended, dozens of people stayed behind. Some thanked me, some shared their own stories. One elderly gentleman quietly admitted his daughter had been asking him to sign papers he didn't understand. I think I'll ask more questions now. I smiled. I think your daughter should welcome them. Several weeks later, I drove to the cemetery carrying fresh white lilies. I sat beside William's headstone exactly as I had so many times before, but this visit felt different. I finally understand. The wind stirred gently through the trees. You weren't trying to teach me to be suspicious. You were trying to teach me to stay strong. I smiled through tears, and I finally learned. As I stood to leave, I looked once more at the quiet hillside stretching before me. A year ago, I believed the greatest victory would be recovering my retirement savings. I was wrong. The greatest victory wasn't getting the money back. It wasn't winning the investigation. It wasn't even seeing justice served. The greatest victory was reclaiming something I didn't realize I had lost. My confidence, my independence, my voice. Money can be stolen. Trust can be broken. Even families can lose their way. But if we have the courage to face the truth, to learn from our mistakes, and to keep moving forward with wisdom instead of bitterness, we can rebuild a life stronger than the one we thought had been taken from us. If my story has reminded you of someone you love or encouraged you to ask one more question before signing an important document, I hope you'll carry that lesson with you. And if you've ever faced betrayal, loss, or the difficult journey of rebuilding trust, I'd truly love to hear your story in the comments below. Your experiences may give someone else the courage they need today. If you enjoyed this emotional family story of resilience, justice, and hope, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that it's never too late to reclaim your independence. Thank you for spending this journey with me.